So, with the Delhi gang rape case in the news again, I think there seems to be a general enthusiasm in the country to see the rapists hung as soon as possible. I don't know, I can't help but to pause and wonder if this enthusiasm is sort of barbaric.
Yeah, it may seem barbaric, but it's a procedural way that is laid down in the constitution of the country. It goes from the High Court to the Supreme Court to the president of the country who finally takes the decision.
Also, adding on to what he just said, it's reserved only for the rarest of rare cases, and India has shown extreme restraint in the execution for quite a few years. Only 8 have been executed since 1996. Most of the sentences are converted into life imprisonment. Like, famous examples are Kasab and Afzal Guru, who were executed for their heinous crimes against India.
See, I partially agree with what you're saying, but think about this. What is the most important aspect of punishing somebody? It's to reform them, right? So, do you really believe that death penalty is going to reform the offenders? No, right? Because they're going to be too dead to be reformed. I somehow believe that capital punishment is more like vengeance, and something like life imprisonment is a more severe punishment as compared to death penalty. First of all, death penalty puts an end to a person's life, and his punishment ends right there, right? But in life imprisonment, he's forced to live within that char diwali for his entire life, right?
Correct. I believe that the life sentence is too absolute for one human to inflict on another, even when backed by a legal process. The UN Human Rights Office believes that the death penalty undermines human dignity, as the death sentence bases itself on the notion that some humans do not deserve to live.
But there is a need to deal with these offenders, right?
Yes, we certainly do need to find a solution. And personally speaking, I think death penalty would be a great way to put an end to our current conditions. You know, as a citizen, I can feel safe. I no longer have to worry about a criminal on the street.
But do you really think that death penalty could deter crimes? I mean, there is no statistical evidence that confirms that deterrence work, and no one knows whether the death penalty deters more crimes than life imprisonment. So I personally think the certainty of punishment rather than the severity is the actual deterrent.
What bothers me the most is the wrong person getting sentenced to death. But such miscarriage of justice occurs in any judiciary, no matter how developed it may be. Also, unlike prison sentences, the death penalty is irreversible and irreparable.
You know, when you mention a miscarriage of justice, a really interesting story that I read about comes to my mind. So I read about this interview about this person called Azam Suleiman. So he, back in 2006, he was sentenced to death on 8 counts, if I'm not wrong, right? And in an interview, he recently said that he was waiting in the crime branch for like 8 to 9 hours, and then he was presented in front of the DCP, and the DCP tells him to choose between 3 cases. And the 3 cases were the Godhra train carnage, Hareen Pandey's murder, and that Akshat Dham thing that happened. And he says that ऐसा लग रहा था that DCP साहब सब्जी भाजी की लॉरी लेके निकले हैं और लोगों से पूछ रहे हैं कि कौन सी सब्जी चाहिए और कितने भाव में चाहिए. And so, seeing cases like this, don't you believe that there is a huge risk of executing someone who's innocent?
But aren't there reasons we take that risk though?
Yeah, I mean, one of the primary reasons is providing closure to the families of these victims. In 2005, there was this brutal Noida serial murders where more than 15 children were brutally murdered and were buried. Which, I mean, what other way can you provide them justice apart from giving death to these criminals?
But is revenge masquerading as justice? A revenge philosophy inevitably leads to an endless cycle of violence. We as a society have to move away from the eye for an eye revenge mentality if civilization is to advance, and choose to work on more effective solutions like social education, policing, and judicial reform. Forgiveness is the only way to develop as a civilization, and this won't happen in a revenge driven society.
So, putting aside moral and ethical questions, is there an economic argument against the death penalty?
Of course, there's a huge burden on state resources because of this. The money that is used by the state can be better utilized in education of underprivileged children, since education is the best form of deterrence. In 2011, India's prison system had over 112% prisoners of its total capacity. Living conditions are inhumane. There were 88 unnatural deaths because of such conditions. And the government also spends so much on maintenance. We also spend 25 crores on CASA alone. And given he was a special case.
So let's say the state does take on this additional burden, right? The question then to explore is if the state's action will actually be unbiased.
See, I seem to believe that the state's action are definitely biased because I feel that the death penalty is economically discriminatory. How many times do you see a rich brat getting hung? Never, right? It's always the poor person. Poor people cannot afford their own lawyers and therefore they're given the public defendants. And these public defenders, half of the times, they aren't even interested in the case that they're fighting. All they care about is the money that they're getting from the government. And they will definitely get it, no matter what. So they don't even put in the right amount of effort that needs to be put in to fight the case. In India, people with political influence and power are more often not imprisoned, let alone executed. The death penalty is often used as in a disproportional way, and some studies even go out to show that 80 to 90% of people who are on the death row are from minority groups. And what's even more astonishing is the fact that 95% of them are classified as poor.
So I completely agree with you. So I know that, I mean, obviously, killing someone will have consequences. The terrorist organizations, they can retaliate. And there can be like strikes in various communities.
But then again, we'd have consequences even if the accused is not killed. The infamous attack in Zaveri Bazaar on Kasab's birthday in 2011 is probably a brilliant example. Having them executed or keeping them alive does not stop organizations outside from attacking.
Also, well, apart from that, these terrorists can also be used as bargaining chips for their affiliated organizations. Like in the year 1999, where IC-814 was hijacked, and as a consequence of which we had to release the three terrorists. One of them was Maulana Masood Azhar, who later went on to carry on plan the parliament attacks in 2001, involved in the murder of journalist Daniel Pearl, as well as planning of 9/11.
To add on to what he said, I don't think India's current socioeconomic conditions justify abolishing the death penalty. Comparing India to other countries like Canada, Australia, and European nations is definitely unfair because they've already achieved that economic prosperity, education, and low crime rates. And I think India has a long way to go before we make such a strong step.
Look, generally speaking, I think we should admit that most individuals aren't inherently good or inherently evil. I'm convinced broken systems create broken people. We should probably recognize our collective failure to design and sustain institutions that can end these flawed cultural norms and realities. So what we need to talk about is our failure to facilitate total access to education, for that matter, the broadening of the definition of education, and other such institutional reforms that will play a central role in preventing these terrible outcomes. Look, my personal feeling is that these guys probably should be hanged. If there's a minute chance that it serves as a deterrent, just because of the sheer brutality of the crime, we should probably take it. However, we shouldn't be satisfied with a set of hangings. I think we should stay angry and stay frustrated at ourselves and at the broken systems that we collectively define.